All right. So this morning, my friends, we have been talking about faith at work. Oh, it was Noah. Okay, my apologies, Noah. So we have been talking about the stuff that we have learned and the stuff that we have talked about, these theological things. What do they all mean? How do we actually put them into practice? So this week, I wanted to talk about humility, which humility is not, for me, the interesting thing about humility, and I think maybe you guys don't know, humility is the opposite of pride. Pride and humility are the opposites. So the interesting thing for me, like I remember for me, I was a theater kid in middle school and high school. And I remember the first play that I did in high school was my junior year, and one of the seniors was the main character in the first play. It was a play called Scapino, which was actually like based on something funny happened on the way to the forum, if you guys have heard of that one. But anyway, so the main character, Scapino, was played by this guy, Dan. And Dan was like, not only was he the main character in this play, but he was one of the most popular kids at school. He was like ASB something. Everybody thought Dan was like the coolest and blah, 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 blah. And I remember, like, and that's a tough thing for me about theater, is that in theater, one of the things that you crave is, or a big deal, is the bows. So, you do the whole play. If you guys have ever seen a play before, you do the whole play, and at the end, each person comes out and bows. And there's an interesting, I don't know if you guys have ever heard the phrase, I'm sure you have, break a leg. Break a leg is actually a theater term, and what it means, I don't know if I can show, here, can I stand up here? Oh, you still can't quite see my legs. Let me stand up on this stool. I'm going to hit the ceiling though. Is that, so from a theater perspective, you bow, like this. Hold on, I got to do this. So you bow just normally like, thank you, right? You bow like this. Usually you put your hands in front. That's like a better bow, right? You put your hands in front and you go, thank you, But to break a leg, I got to show you my legs. To break a leg is where you actually put your leg behind the other, can you see that? Behind the other leg so that you can bow even deeper. So that's what breaking a leg means. When people said, hey, go break a leg, it means don't just bow, but be able to bow so much that you can bow, they want you to bow even more. So I remember going back to Dan. Dan, popular kid, big, like the biggest role. Not only did he break a leg, not only did he go out there and do the, he came out for his bow, and we all come and just do, because there's, there's the humble bow, which is just your hands like this, and you just kind of bow it down like this, and the arms just kind of flop loose. There's the bigger bow, which is like, thank you. And then you bow. Dan came, and then again, there's the breaking the leg, where you put your leg behind the other one. Dan came out, and Dan did this. Dan put his arms out like this, like he's embracing the, applause, puts his arms out like this, leans backwards, and then bows into the hand. So it was like the ultimate, soaking it in sort of a bow. And for me, that was a big part of theater. Theater was about the biggest role, about the biggest applause, about pride, really. And so for me, that was a big challenge for me when I came to Jesus, was this idea that, so y'all believe that pride is a sin. Pride is not good. How does that work? So for me, and that's that thing too, is that it's so strange that you hear about, in sports, right? It's not even necessarily about pride, but it's about it's always supposed to be about being the best, right? Being the best performer, being the MVP, being the star is the goal, the best player on the team. We talk about national pride, taking pride in your work, being proud of your heritage, being proud of your kids, having your parents be proud of you. Pride is such a big thing in our culture that it was really tough. So I'm but you guys are saying pride's a sin. Pride is not good. So what is pride, first of all? So I looked this up. I don't know if you guys can see this. That this was the definition that I found, and it said that pride is a feeling or deep pleasure or satisfaction derived from one's own achievements. Which I thought is really interesting because it's definitely, I mean, it's obviously kind of the, maybe, I guess we wouldn't call that selfish, but it is, right? It's ultimately about a glorification of myself. Feeling a deep, what does it say? Satisfaction from what I have done. Is that it's pride. I don't know just how how else you define it. Like, think about like, what makes pride, like what are the details of pride or the attributes? Like I was thinking about, pride is definitely exclusive and not inclusive. Like that's kind of the whole thing about pride, is that if I have, if I'm proud of like my sports team, for example, I'm proud of the Dodgers for winning the World Series. There's a certain level that it's like, so I have that and you don't as a Giants fan, or you don't as a Padres fan or an Angels fan or a whatever. There's an exclusivity about it. If I'm proud of my heritage, I'm proud that my ancestors came from Scotland. They didn't come from Ireland. They didn't come from England. They didn't come from China. They didn't come. So it is an exclusive sort of a thing. And it's, to a certain extent, part of it then is satisfaction that I am this and not that. And I think that's the challenge. I think that when we talk about pride, is that pride, and that's the other thing too I was reading about, they were saying that a lot of times pride gets mixed up with confidence. And that's a real challenge, and to say that like, well, if you can't have pride, that means you can't like be confident. And it's like, those are different concepts, or different, yeah, it's not just those are like competing things. They're talking about completely different concepts. But pride, I think, is more about, well, I would put it this way. Like, remember when we were talking about, I don't know if we were talking about like anger and stuff like that, but about this idea of like, sin is crouching at your door. Remember, didn't we talk about that with Cain and Abel, right? And it's this idea of like, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but what you do with it might be. So it's kind of that idea that like, confidence I don't think is a bad thing. Hey, I'm pretty good at this. I'm a pretty good whatever. Like, I think that's okay. That's fine. If anything, that's a good thing that we're glorifying the fact that God has given me the gift that I'm good at, whatever. But if that turns into, hey, I'm pretty good at this, better than you, that's different. If all of a sudden it turns into like, hey, because if you say I'm the best at whatever, then that means best is different than good, right? Because best means I am better than everybody. I am better than you and you and you and you and you and you. Like, that's where I think that pride thing becomes a little bit different. Ultimately, like, if you guys have ever heard of original sin was pride. Original sin was Adam and Eve saying, like, if I eat this fruit, I can be like God. I don't need God anymore. I can be the one that makes the calls. I can be the one that chooses. I can be the one that decides. Me. Like, that's ultimately this, and even the Bible talks about selfish ambition and vain conceit. Like this idea of a puffing up of my own glorification. So let me since we're talking about the book of James in this series, whoops, I closed the thing. Let's dive into, we're on James chapter 3, there she is, in verse 13. Actually, ironically, we left off in verse 12 last time. So, but in James chapter 3 is where he's talking specifically about pride. Or, I mean, at least connecting to what the stuff that he had talked about before. So, my apologies, I didn't save my place before I started talking. So, all right, so James chapter 3, starting in verse 13. You guys can already see it on screen, but I can't because it's too little, on my screen at least. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, and then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. That's pretty good. Sow in peace, reap a harvest of righteousness. So, I mean, James goes so far, I mean, he even talks about it being demonic, right? Is this idea that pride is ultimately, I mean, that's what they talk about Satan. A lot of people describe Satan as ultimately believing that he, like, a pride issue. Personally, I have a feeling that it might be similar. It might be this idea, and some of the passages that people have attributed to Satan do make it seem like pride is his issue. Though as an angel, there's a debate about that one. But still this idea that a puffing up of ourselves, this idea that, like, and even this idea of wisdom, if once we start valuing our own wisdom, saying that, like, hey, I got this, I don't need, I don't need to listen to God or to hear from God, or like, I can handle this on my own, is that idea of a puffing up, of pride. So, what is the opposite? Since we're talking about what do we do here, how do we actually put this into action, like they talk about with humility? So humility obviously is the opposite of pride, and the most awesome, like, obviously the biggest example that we have is of Jesus. Is that, so we have this idea of, like, and you know, the famous passage talks about humbles himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. And that for us, like, I think it's lost sometimes about how ridiculous a concept it is. And we talked about this with atonement and Trinity and different things and grace, but how ridiculous a concept it is that God of all, like, the I am, so lowered himself to become a human, and then not only became a human, but then died for all other humans. Like that's crazy. I mean, if you think about it, like, that would be similar. I mean, not entirely similar, because as they talk about, like, God in his holiness, the fact that he is holy, he is so unlike anything else. He is more unlike anything than anything else is unlike anything else. Like, he's the most different thing out there. But a step like along those lines to try and understand, imagine an anthill, right? And we see ants, and I mean, like, I don't know about you, like, there was ants at our backyard yesterday. And so we had to squash some of them because they were getting into the food and, like, blah, 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 blah. And we do that, and I didn't feel guilty about killing some ants because they were getting in the way, and they were, like, you know, whatever, and there's a bajillion of them and blah, 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 blah. But imagine me if, like, instead of that, if I said, like, no, wait, you know what? I'm going to become an ant. So I'm going to give up my sentience. I'm going to give up my capabilities that I have as a human. I'm going to give up my size. I'm going to give up everything that makes me human to become an ant. And then I'm going to volunteer, hey, no, let them squash me. So all you guys get away. I'm going to die. I'm going to sacrifice myself for you ants. Like, it's a similar level of craziness that we're talking about with God lowering himself to become us, because we are so much lower than ants compared to him. And yet that's what he did. And so this modeling this idea of humility, and again, like the famous example too of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, right? Which for us, and that's always that thing, like I've been tempted before. I'm like, should we try that? Should we try washing each other's feet? I feel like culturally it's, because back in those days, they actually did. Like you had a servant that would wash your feet. Like these days, even people that have servants, still they're not washing their feet. Like that just doesn't happen in our culture today. But it did back then. But again, it was a servant. It was the lowest job of everybody because their feet were so gross. And here's Jesus saying like, hey, I got this. I'm literally God, and he literally like took off his shirt and was sitting there in his underwear, tied a towel around him, and started washing his disciples' feet, his students' feet. You know, so it's like Jesus definitely modeled this idea of if anybody had a right to brag about themselves, I mean, he would have been right. I am literally the best at everything. I am the most powerful. I'm the only one that has power, period. But instead, Jesus modeled the exact opposite. And he even talked about whoever is great among you become a servant. The least, like the least will become the greatest. Because in the kingdom of heaven, it's all flipped. Power is not a sense of like, I'm strong and I'm the best. That's not what is great in the kingdom of heaven. I love this phrase. They talked about that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Another way that I heard it phrased was actually our president-elect, Joe Biden, I don't know, it's kind of funny, like if you guys ever see him speak, he's always saying, well, my daddy used to say, and my grandpappy used to say it. He's got all of these but he's always done that. That's just kind of who he is. I guess it's because he's like, a Southern or a East Coast Irishman, or I don't know what it is culturally that makes him do that. But anyway, he had one phrase that I really liked. He said that his mom always used to say, no one's better than you, but you're not better than anyone. And that's such a good, because like what mom would say you're not better than anyone, right? That's not how moms talk usually. But this idea that you're not better than anyone, but no one's better than you. Like that's such a great, that those are both true. That it's not and in our world today, that's not how we function, right? In order to get ahead, it's me or you. And so who's going to be better? Who's going to get that job? Who's going to get that, that ASB election? Who's going to get the ranking? Who's going to get valedictorian even is a battle to see who's going to be best. Who's got the best grades? Who's got, scores the most points, whatever. That's how our society is built. And Jesus says that's not how life is supposed to function. So, what do we do with this? That's the whole point of what we're talking about here. How do we be those kind of people? And the first one, which I was thinking about, and this is actually so key to this entire thing, is that one, hopefully you guys know with everything that we've talked about, it's where we're supposed to land is the fact that you can't. You cannot become the kind of person that Jesus sees you being. You can't. But the Spirit working through you can. And a part of it, like that's humility right there. Being able to say, Jesus, I can't do this. That's the humility of being a Christ follower. Is that I think that's honestly step one for us, is that we need to get to a point of saying, Jesus, I can't do this on my own. And that's tough. That is really tough. I mean, like for me, for example, like I remember, and maybe we've talked about this, like I've been unemployed a couple of times in my life, and actually, so I moved out of my parents' house when I was 21, and then I moved back in 3 years later for a couple of months, then I moved back out again, and then I was forced to move back in a couple of years later. And that time of moving back in, that last time I was 26 or 7 years old, and coming up to my mom and to saying like, hey mom, I have no money. Like, I've been trying to make it as an adult and I failed. Like, I have nowhere else to go. Dang, dude, that was so hard. Trust me, guys. Like, that was so humiliating to be able to say, I couldn't do this. I tried to be an adult and I failed. Dang, that was so humbling. But in a sense, like, that is a good thing. That level of humility, as opposed to the opposite, which is the pride of like, you know what? I can make it on my own. I can figure this out. I'm a big, strong adult now, or I'm a big, strong teenager, or whatever your context would be. I can do this on my own is what makes that so dangerous. Because I think how this works out is this humility of not having that. And again, it's different than confidence. It's different than saying, you know what, you're right, I just suck at everything. I just can't do everything. No. It's the opposite. We have confidence because we have Jesus. This is why, you guys have all heard that phrase, right? I can do all things in Christ who gives me strength. That's why this matters. That's why that matters, is because you can. You can literally do anything. I mean, I don't think Jesus was being metaphorical when he said faith can move mountains. I think he was being literal. Is that, like, there is literally nothing that the God of the universe can't do if we just let him. But once we say, you know what, God, I got this. I don't need you to do it for me. I can do it. That's pride. That's pride right there. And so for me, I think that's that humility of being able to say, okay, God, like, and you know what, sometimes it might be like, you know what? God saying to me, you can do this. Let's do, or even better, let's do this together. You know what? Like, forget about it being beyond you. That's not even the conversation. Let's do this together. If we approached our entire lives that way, I mean, that's how Jesus did it. And that's how we're meant to do it. Let's pray. Jesus, I'm praying to you, and that's how we're doing it. So thank you. Thank you for this morning. And I pray, as we're talking about surrender, as we're talking about this idea of I can't do it without you, I need you to do it together, help us with that. Because, man, it is so hard in our world today to not elevate myself. I mean, when I see people on YouTube and I see like all this that are like, look at me and look at everything that I do, and I am so interesting and so important, and to not do that feels so much less. It feels like, it feels embarrassing, and it feels small. It feels like I am less than. And yet, I mean, I know in my mind that you've told us about, like, I can do all things through you that gives me strength. So help me do that this week and all weeks. Just show us what that looks like to have that level of humility. Thank you. We love you. In your name we pray.